service from English into Italian and vice versa. Okay, good morning and welcome everyone. Welcome to the Fondazione Nazionale della Danza. I would like to welcome you here today. And we have also here with us the Councillor Annalisa Rabitti for Culture. I'd like to start by thanking two people we need to be grateful for during this long period we spent creating a project and a process that was very complex. I'd like to thank Costanza Meli, together with her Belgian and Greek colleagues. She curated the entire journey you will see today, and she was also a partner in the creation of this project. And I'd also like to thank Fabio Ferretti. Briefly, what made us do this kind of project? We wanted to experiment different creative processes with many choreographers working at the same time, coming from different geographical areas and different styles of dance, and all of them worked on the same topic. Dance that has to be translated to different contexts. Then we wanted to experiment the presence of dance in representation spaces that are different, more difficult, more stimulating, more challenging. And we also wanted to experiment what a small niche as dance can do to contribute to wider and more complex and stimulating reflections when it comes to the role of culture in today's society. So we wanted to experiment. And that's how all processes are created and grow. It was a long learning period for us. We learned so many things thanks to the relationships we created and everything we did. We have some dancers here with us. Also, dancers learned something completely different from what they usually do, what their role is, and their relationship with the audience. Space, it set the focus of today's discussion. What we want to narrate, not only to ourselves, but also to our listeners. We are recording a streaming. We also want to truly understand our role in the future. This is an extremely receptive city when it comes to issues related to transformations. It's extremely stimulating for those like us that work in this sector, for the importance of culture in social and transformation processes. So after this brief introduction, I now leave the floor to Annalisa Rabitti to greet us on behalf of this city, this extraordinary city where we can experiment and where we can start to move towards other realities. Good morning everyone. I'm so happy to be here today with Gigi. I obviously greet you on behalf of the mayor. I also wanted to tell you the idea of city we have here in Reggio Emilia. Sometimes it can seem quite strange. I'm the councillor for culture, marketing of the territory, a city without barriers, and also equal opportunities. And we did that because we wanted culture not only to be in the usual spaces, but we also wanted culture to go out and meet people. We have been working with Gigi for many years. Even before I started working as a town councillor, we worked on this right to beauty, not only for places, but also for people that find it sometimes difficult to meet culture. We walked through an unexpected city. We saw children that were awed by what we were doing, people that joined our small group of people. And we talked about human and urban regeneration. When we started, our slogan was, culture will not just stay in her place. We wanted to talk about the issues. We wanted to challenge the world of culture to tackle new challenges and meet new worlds. In this performance we asked for the participation of dance schools, and they were able to really train so well thanks together with Aterballetto, and the costumes were made by Cucire per Ricucire. It's a laboratory where children that were subjected to sexual trade can be reborn. And these costumes were done with people that had never experienced this kind of experiences. We have been doing this for many years. We do that all over the city because we believe the culture can be a driver for regeneration. It can save lives. It can bring hope. It can help us find new questions. And that's the key to find a future where our city can find a new idea and concept of citizenship. I think this is a very good marriage, a well-done marriage, so we're happy to have in Reggio Emilia this kind of situation. And I call here now Costanza Meli. Let's now have a seat. And she will lead us through this overview, through this permeable overview between different worlds and sensitivities. Good morning. You said we had a monitor here. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to say thank you. I'm really glad to be here to participate to this day, almost at the end of this process and project, where we can now reflect on it as an entire team. I was the curator for this part of the project in Reggio Emilia. This project we called Reenactment, but as you know, nothing in this job is done by ourselves. After Annalisa's speech, I think there's not much more to say. She summarized all the topics of this project. First of all, future, that was introduced by Gigi, participation, collaboration, and active citizenship, the meeting of different disciplines. These are all topics we will tackle today together with you and with all the people that have actively participated to this project. This project was called Ideal City, but you know that you cannot have an ideal city as a concept, and a city is ever changing. So before analyzing this entire process of the project, I'd like to briefly talk about the language objects we have used till the beginning of the project. In the reference text you have in the brochure and the introduction, you have public art, you have reenactment, and obviously you have an ideal city, the title of the project itself. Why do we talk about this meeting between dance and public art? This is the first and true challenge, and challenge is the main keyword today. It's a challenge to put together the language of contemporary art and dance, of public art and urban life, because public art is something that comes from its own world, its own way of processing content and languages starting from the 1980s till now. And it has lived through different steps and phases. The second word is reenactment. This word we use when we talk about this second part of the project here in Reggio Emilia. We can now move forward. I don't want to give a lesson, I just want to give you some food for thought about these language objects. I chose this quote because it's really short, but it shows the process made by public art, and it talks about the destructuration, the destructuring of two elements, city and sculpture, and through the relationship with the context, that leads to a radically new experience. Experience is another word we will use a lot today. So what is subverted? Thanks to the destructuring of the monument. The monument is the presence of art within the public space, and the destruction of sculpture that is all started destructuring itself as a language during the 1950s. So we have this destructuring between the space of the work of art and the space of the individual. That's how we can read public art projects. This individual is not just a simple spectator. It becomes co-responsible for the outcome of the work of art. This is the first result of public art. What was considered during the 1980s and 90s, the kernel of public art. The individual is not just a spectator, but is co-responsible for the work of art. In the 1980s and 90s, we worked on the participation of the individual, of the audience, to create a work of art, to create a collective work of art, to share the construction, the building of that work of art. It becomes something collective, and it's not only related to the artist. The second step, I put these two words that seem to be contradicting each other. Is it possible to have inclusive processes with the impermanence of the art? We say that we want to make the collective as the artist, the creator of a work of art. But if you remove the work of art and it becomes a process, it becomes impermanent, ephemeral, can it at the same time keep representing a reference for the public space? Can it activate inclusion processes? And that's the third step. The audience is called to the forefront as a protagonist, not for the work of art, but for the creation of the territory, and at the same time it provides new ways for languages that put together different types of languages, like music, art, performance, theatre. And that's what we have seen in the last few days. I've only added some images we saw during the first conference we did, I think about 1.5 years ago. I chose to use these images because it's quite clear. Instead of monuments standing up within the public space representing something on behalf of someone, we have bodies becoming from vertical to horizontal. They occupy the public space through a performance. But here, we don't just build a work of art, but we're not building a process yet. What we want to reach today is to build a process and not just the work of art. Let's move forward. And this is one of the keywords of today's public art, the placemaking. They try to interpret a space. The artist is not the focus of the entire creative process. Communities become the main characters within this placemaking. Then we have change. As we were saying, we will think about it today. We have no ideal city, but we have an ever-changing city. We have a future city. That's why we will talk about the future today. And then we have this idea of sharing. What is shared? Not the building, the creation of a work of art, but this building, this future city, this sense of belonging is not just a fixed identity. That is built together and it also changes. Then we have memory, the wishes that can be found within territories. So what are the real and perceived characteristics of each space? This word here, reenactment, is the reenactment of a work of art, of a performance without substantial changes in the present. And these other words are all correlated to that. It's what we refer to when we say that this project had two different steps. The first phase was more exhibitory, and this second phase, a more urban one. Now the works are reenacted, reactivated. Today's challenge is specifically this one. It's not just rebuilding, reformulating a work of art, a performance, an exhibition as it was done in the past, because it still has something to say. Within this process, we worked on the translation, on the dialogue together with the authors, the choreographer, the dancers that came up with the dancers, not to re-narrate it, but to translate it and to create a dialogue with the communities and the city itself, to create this shared process and not just a shared work of art. That's why I say we have overcome the pure idea of reenactment and of work of art to find something new. We did that because we worked on the translation and on rediscussion of the content of both the work of art and the public space, which we have reinterpreted, relived and re-listened to. And that's what we will talk about later on. Before starting to talk about the project itself, before telling you what we have done till now, also thanks to the contributions of Nadja and Pauline and everything that will happen or has just happened in Athens and Brussels, I'd like to ask Luc Torri, who is the CEO of Reggiane and the Innovation Park here in Reggio, to say just a few words to answer a question we asked to all our partners that worked with us in the project. The question was to reinterpret the idea of an ideal city. So what is an ideal city in perspective in the declination between culture, art and urban regeneration? So since the East to Reggiana and the Innovation Park project is a central part of the regeneration of the city, you're the best person to tell that. That's a bit too much, but I tried to say in a few minutes what was our way of thinking. This is a technological, humanistic part. And our idea of adding humanistic, what does science and technology to do with the humanistic parts? We believe that is the future, but to create that place, we try to find reference points that could create a gap with the schemes of the past. We wanted to create a place. The first element was a dream. The dream was to change the word from objective, goal, to dream. I believe that the word goal is too poor in itself. We see that on many documents, but what does it mean? We wanted to create a different place, and a dream is more powerful. And if you grip that dream, it gives you strength. In order to renovate that place, that venue, trust was important. To change a place means having an agreement with the people, with the neighborhood, with the city itself. You need to have an exchange of trust. We're moving towards that dream, but we will do that. And as soon as things start happening, that trust grows and grows. The third element was the aesthetics. That is to create beautiful things. The right to beauty described by Annalisa Rabitti was something we focused on. I've been working for 8 years on furniture and buildings. The cost to create something beautiful or ugly is the same. The cost is the same. Let's not talk about today's materials, but it's a matter of will. The fourth element was innovation. In places, you need to have innovations. An innovation that comes from the will of a will for renovation. And wanting something leads to something changing. These elements, dream, trust, aesthetics, and innovation, simply recall the fifth element that connects us all right now, that is life. You need to have life within public spaces. We cannot have spaces where in one space you work, in another one you have fun, and in the third one you live. And that's what's happening in today's cities. We wanted to have a place full of life, and one thing you need to do to create life is to do this kind of renovations, to do this kind of projects, to bring art and bring it towards innovative places. We want to do the other way around, to bring innovation towards art. If we believe that innovation and art can mingle, then we need to be more permeable. If elements start contaminating, start combining, if we create some confusion as well, I'd say, in this kind of situations, then that is a benefit for all of us, for art, for the places, for all those people that want to experience art and this kind of events. But that's also beneficial for places like Innovation Park, where you usually work and create innovation. But if we follow this train of thought, we find a new way of leaving places that can be beneficial to both places and people, and that's the final aim for all of us. All right, thank you. So my task right now is to summarize what happened in the past. What did we do to reach this point. So what you are seeing now are images that will be commented in just a few minutes. I'd like to have the presentation that tells about these 2 years of project. I will tell you about the steps we did. I'd like to start by saying that Ideal City is a project that was co-funded by the European Community. We obtained fundings in 2019 through the Creative Europe tender. It's a project we focused on, and since the beginning we wanted this kind of structure in 3 different steps. Structure that had the precise concept of MicroDances, then a first part with the presentations in different places that are different from the theatre, and then to enter into this reenactment told by Costanza. This presentation is a presentation we created in 2019, and we realized we did everything we said we wanted to do, and that's not what always happens with European projects. So, who are we? We have the Aterballetto Fondazione Nazionale della Danza together with the Greek National Opera Ballet and the Discotheque in Brussels. These are the 3 partners for an ideal city. The time window is almost at its end. We started in December 2020 with the first year. As you can imagine, how many difficulties we had to face during that year. We wanted to enter this dialogue between micro and macro, the stage in its formal and more intimate forms. We wanted to understand how the body can relate in its different declinations of space and audience. We wanted to enter the connection between the different choreographical works and spaces that are different within the city. We started this project with a strong idea, this MicroDances idea. It's a broad project, and Ideal City is just a subgroup, a sub-translation of this project. MicroDances is about the production of short choreographies, 6 minutes, 8 minutes. We have different choreographers, Tedesco, Latuaro, and so on. We produced 22 choreographies that have a reduced time and space. 3 steps. The production, from 21 they became 22 choreographies, then a first presentation, and then this reenactment as last step. This is the list of what we have truly done. 11 microdances done by us in Reggio, 9 produced by the Greek National Opera Ballet, and 2 co-produced by Les Halles d'Escarbec that were hosted here with dancers from the Aterballetto, and the total was 22 dancers. We did 2 important presentations, the first one in Athens in October 2021, where we moved through 3 emblematic places like the Contemporary Art Museum, the Acropolis Museum, and the National Opera. And then in December we went to the Les Halles d'Escarbec. And this presentation cycle in non-theatre places with exhibition purposes will end this year at the Chiostri San Pietro in Reggio Emilia. Then we started this step, the reenactment step. Before going into details about it, this slide you see will be the focus for a half a minute focus by Nadja and Pauline. I'd like to go back to what we did here today, to what we did here. Can you please start 2 videos? The first one is 1 minute long. It's a short trailer narrating the experience in Athens. And then we have the Brussels experience, what was done in the museums and within the Les Halles de Scarbeck, to really understand what this entire project was. While we're waiting, please, Ivana, would you like to come and sit here? This is the Acropolis Museum in Athens, where we had 4 MicroDances. All right. We can also now watch the December experience in Brussels. Can you please lower the volume? on the video. Well, you can still see the images from the MicroDances presentation in Brussels. You see the difference in the spaces between the two cities. In Athens, we had the Acropolis Museum that was really iconic, while in Brussels we created a journey in marketplace from the beginning of the 20th century, and we completely changed its usual representation. Since dance is the focus of the project, we asked Ivana, one of the most iconic dancers of Aterballetto, what she thinks about everything. She was in the focus of many projects. And what does she think about how dance can go to places where it doesn't usually go? We wanted to hear her voice to better understand what it means for a dancer to face places that are different from the stage and audiences that are not used to visit theatres. First of all, good morning, everyone. I'm sorry, I don't usually speak in public, so I hope I won't do some gaps. So the thing is to get out of your comfort zone. By comfort zone, I mean the classical idea of a theatre, the stage, the distance with the audience, the lights. They become really reference points that calm you after many years of doing this job. Participating to a project like MicroDances and Infinite in the past meant connecting with other elements that are part of the project itself but are not some point of reference. The audience is not just made up of spectators. The audience is close to you. It's at your same height. It looks at you. It observes you in a different way compared to a normal audience where you have some kind of distance. You dance, but you are at a different level, not in terms of height. You feel safe on the stage. There, it becomes some kind of dialogue with the audience. So even if you try to create your own atmosphere, in this case I was dancing with a partner, it was a pas de deux. Even if you try to create an intimate atmosphere with the other dancer, obviously that intimate relationship is interrupted by the audience that looks at you in the eyes, wants a closer, more direct contact. Another aspect is the venue. We are used to scenographies created specifically for us, lights, atmospheres, scenographies, scenic elements that recreate a place that is not real. In this case, however, the place is real. It's there. You can feel the colors that change from one day to the other. Everything is there. It's tangible. And every single time the performance, be it comfortable or uncomfortable, changes. When you do live performances, it's always the first time, even when you're in the theatre, but even more in venues like those we have seen and this one here. Your feelings change. Thank you. All right? My goal was to narrate you our past steps and what is happening now. We are doing this reenactment we have explained. It is taking place right now in Reggio Emilia, and it has just taken place in Brussels. Before looking at the 2 days in Brussels, I only wanted to say one thing. The reenactment we are carrying out here in Reggio Emilia, Costanza will better explain it, was built on a network of connections, of relationships, built partly by the Fondazione Nazionale della Danza over the years, and it was also made up of new relationships through this project. As Annalisa said, we made this choice and it paid off. The meeting with, for example, Luca Torri, with Stu Reggiane, with Matteo Bassoli from the San Prospero Theatre Association, who's not here today, unfortunately, added meaning, added elements. The Roma Zero Association, was Maria Teresa, helped us literally open doors. Thanks to Roma Zero, we were able to open doors we didn't know and open previously unknown places. I wanted to say how this was a moment to strengthen connections also with people who we have cooperated with for years, Reggio children, for example, and then all the entire world who helped us practically build the scenographies Cooperativa Allovile, Cucire per Cucire. And as Annalisa was saying earlier, Danza Reggiana, the dance schools in Reggio, the Agra project by Michele Merula and Studio Excel from Miss Matano, that provided many dancers you will see in the last few days. In these days, I asked Pauline de Boulaye to come here to tell us what was the experience in Brussels. You have seen the images from Léal de Skerbeck. So we have this theatrical setting for the 21st and 22nd of May. It was the first city where we did the reenactment that brought some microdances in the urban space. I'd like to say that among the 22 microdances we have produced, we have chosen 8. These 8 microdances were given to other dancers. Each city made different choices. We worked with the dancers of Laura Matano, Michele Merule. Brussels made a different choice. These dancers took the choreographies and reenacted them within urban settings. So Pauline will now tell us her experience. Pauline will talk in French. If you want to hear the Italian translation, you can find the devices on the site. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to talk French right now. So I have about 20 minutes to present months of work that led to a very time-scaled and millimetrical process, just a weekend in Brussels life. I'll do my best to summarize all these experiences. Thank you for giving me the option to participate in this project. It's a project that resembles my life. I will not spend time narrating my life, but I've worked in cultural institutions where the arts are made sacred. Over the years, there was a chrysalis that then grew. MicroDances resembles steps of my own life. I always try to change, to give sense to things. As you can see here in this slide, I'm an independent creator, and for this project I worked with the Les Halles de Scarbeck, a specific institution that produces circus, dance and hybrid forms that tries to look for connections with the outside and different types of connections with the audience. Obviously, I collaborated with the Greek opera. Everything was explained by the previous speakers. This is just a small presentation of my city. I won't go over what was said before. I'd simply like to show you some steps of the process itself. What is interesting to see is that we have worked during the lockdown. It's very important to remember that we have lived a terrible period of life and public spaces were reduced to nothing. There was no public space anymore. There were no connections with the outer spaces and with other people as well. Think about the relationship we then created with the screens. We lived through computer screens. The first time we met in front of a screen, it was something to try for us. As we worked with our bodies and through bodies, I will not focus on this part of the discussion because we have all lived through something that changed us. I discovered the MicroDances through videos. It was difficult to understand them at the beginning. Only in Athens, when we physically went there, I finally understood all their complexity, the fact of connected extreme scales, inside and outside, macro and micro. Here you can see the discovery phase. I put this picture that describes my vision of Athens. You have probably seen some of these pictures. I will continue this list of dots to connect, the top-down, bottom-up, connecting, deconnecting, representation and present itself. These are all extreme sides of this project. So what happened? In Athens, I was affected by the quality of the gestures, in the fact of concentrating in 5 minutes, a strong experience. One dancer, 6 minutes in a restricted space. It's like suffocation, we could say, something really restricted that made me think about the lockdown period. Another thing that really awed me was the reinterpretation during the reenactment phase. So we reenacted, but where is the limit? When you work outside, you have these face-to-face contacts. We enter a 360-degree space. Another process, moving from the inside to the outside, is that we focused on the transition spaces. For example, where can we go? What can we reach through these transition spaces? Dance is a catharsis, and since it's a catharsis, I don't like to use the term public, but the audience witnesses a performance as it is performed. I could say, I'd like to say sorry, but we treated the audience badly in the last few years. The audience is often forgotten, it's passive. But how can we rework this relationship between the work of art, the performance, the creation itself, and the audience? As you can see, the custodian of the museum was important. It's a figure that provides a sense of safety without showing this sense of control that is so strong after the COVID period and the terrorist attacks. We have become worried after all these happenings in the city when it comes to control. How can we convey safety? Here we are within an elevator, and here we see the transition space. How do we transit from one space to the other? Are we ready to receive an artistic performance? And my question was, how do these transition spaces work? How can it come on the stage? We have specific areas in the theatre to allow for these transitions. How do you appear and disappear in a public space instead? So here we have these changes, these movements, these transitions. How can you root yourself within the public space? How can you enter the public space with these MicroDances? I tried to find some answers. We need to root these actions within bodies, within spaces, and as Costanza was saying, how do we root within these places? Through these connections and the relationships with the community. Everything is rooted within the body. Brussels is a strange city. At a cultural level, we have many different languages spoken in the streets because we have this European function. We speak 150 languages in Brussels. It's the most cosmopolitan city after Dubai in the world. We don't have a contemporary ballet. We don't have a true contemporary dance school apart from a specific company. So in the Les Halles de Schaerbeek, we decided to work with people that have different backgrounds. We have dancers that were selected coming from contemporary dance. We also have many other experimentations, yoga, hip-hop, and so on. Some had backgrounds in Austria from the Strasbourg Experimental Dance Company. Others from the Duente. That is a reference from Gabriel García Lorca. And the Duente relates to the relationship you have with flamenco, with this relationship created by the strength of the music with the dancers. And then we have a network that is connected to the dance within the city. These are dancers that love dancing outdoors. It's a political engagement. It's their own choice. As the dancers said quite clearly, the outdoor space is more difficult than the stage. You need to express a specific type of energy. I often speak about an archaic energy, something that dates back to before the protective walls of our theatres, the protection of the stage, something that comes before culture, something that comes from the energy of the earth. So Do I have a few minutes left? Because I tend to talk a lot. So we decided to choose a specific territory in Brussels. It's within a protected area. It's an urban scar we can cross in just a little amount of time. Brussels is a schizophrenic city. On the one side, everything is exaggerated. The Court of Justice, it's the European capital. But on the other side, it's still a human scale capital with a lot of mass, with so much green. It's a transitory capital. In this area, we have this tension within this urban fracture. There's some tension between spaces occupied by the inhabitants that are spaces that need to have sense, where you take care of others, when you do things together. And on the other side, we have an exaggerated urban development with this gentrification, masses of people that come and change the face of neighborhoods. This is the old maritime harbor in Brussels. Here you see some sort of wedge that comes into the city. This place where there was so much urban activism. It was where the circus school was. The transformation was very rapid. This is this green corridor. Do you see that green area on the upper left part? Then we have a rapid and quick urban development for a sublime place that radically changes the social configuration of the neighborhood. So you have a tangible tension between these different neighborhoods connected by this urban platform. Let's go back to our territory with our map. This is the green corridor with urban activism, where we talk about culture, people that create culture. I did a show here on public art to give. We need to rework this relationship between ecology, citizens and art is really important in Brussels. We have clusters where we can feel a strong energy. Here we have lost the northern Brussels train station. We call this area the Little Manhattan. Here we are living a complete urban development. So here I made you travel through the MicroDances in Brussels. So the dramaturgy of the drama of the narrations, how can we re-elaborate places at different levels? I was at one of the stops of the underground. This is a monument in Brussels we call La Maison du Pain, the House of Bread, and we invite visitors to switch off their computer and to do a silent journey, a journey of the five senses. We need to narrate our places and use MicroDances to do that. Here, I'd like to thank those that made these videos. This is a neighborhood you unfortunately know because of the tragic events of 2015, or better. It's a fascinating neighborhood from a cultural standpoint. It's an amazing place with a community create social and cultural innovation. They added texts and words that accompany us during this journey. And here we discover also underground spaces. Here we re-see through the choice of microdances how we created them. This contact with the earth and trying not to disconnect from the soil. Here you see the group coming down. At one point we have many bridges. It's one of the best things we have in Brussels. The audience here sat. Here we have the group with a guide. You always have some kind of guide within the space. It's someone that deals with the spaces. Then we have the body of the dancers, provides information, and also gives a taste of time. There's a small blackboard where they write. People will subscribe to this group, sit and wait. The first group can see this umbrella, and the umbrella is opened, and this opening of the umbrella means the beginning of the performance. Sometimes we really don't know how to manage these short performances. So the guide needs to check that everyone has come, they have all sat down. So you create the right energy to start the show. And that's our green light. The second group, so the first group comes down silently. Here we have these so-called genius loci. In Athens, we can move through the dancers group, and we wanted to create this door. I could have just stayed silent to show you the kind of silence that the spectators lived. Here we have the second point. We don't want to exploit what was done in the past. Each microdance follows the other. We have a female or a male dancer, but we want to create a connection between the different groups. These dances are micro dances, but they have a certain length, so the audience can exploit the end of one to see the beginning of the second one. As you can see, we have a welcoming community. Something is happening. We organize activities. This is an important passage. It's the passage between Modenbeek and a private area. There's an entrepreneur that has bought these buildings. So now we find ourselves in a public space. But this is the spot where we have buildings that have to be demolished to be rebuilt. Here, coming back to the pictures, here we have the idea of walking, because walking means presence for the audience, a visual presence, because in this case, the dances are first covered. These are the elements we use to cover and uncover, to veil and unveil. It's the audience comes, sees that something is happening, and then that audience make group 1 and 2 even bigger. Here, once again, you see a transforming, a changing city. Here we have a more stressful area. As you can see, the rhythm is faster. Here we are within the maritime station, and we have architectural performances that worked on resilience. We used wooden materials and solar panels beneath those. Within this big place, it's difficult to find your sense of orientation, so we adapted the MicroDances to this building. Here you find the old station that was completely redesigned and renovated. Here we have a second interpretation of Phantasmagoria. This was interesting. There was some kind of doubling. In French, by reenactment, we say to remultiply, because we ask ourselves questions about the limitations of reinterpretation. Do choreographers want reenactment, retransmission? Each dancer gave their own interpretation to the movements. This is a dancer that shows us a possible reinterpretation of Phantasmagoria. Okay, so I will control the video, and here we reach the end of the journey. Do you have one more? Can I have one more minute? I'd like to negotiate for more time. After this journey, we invite the group that becomes bigger and bigger. We invite the group to meet and embrace this installation. Here you can see we have the entire explanation of the transformation of this place, and the artist does some kind of extraction from the soil. Before the public place became private, it excavated, and allows people to rest for a bit and allow people to think about this to reflect on this transformation. Here we have no stage, and we go back to this idea of sacred contact, the connection we have with the land, with the soil, what we truly have under our feet. Here we see the dancers greet us at the end. They did a performance and they sent us a few words that I'd like to tell you as a way to say. So we have spirit of community, contrasts resilience, learning, generosity, absence of stage, but a true scenography, a sense of soil and the reenactment. How many times we reactivate, we reenact. We might have more time to talk about that indirectly. We'll have so much to say also about the way it is possible to organize a transitioning city and its culture for a future world. We will surely have the chance to talk about these transitions in the future. I'd like to spend just a few seconds on this sense of urgency. Urgency to us is one of the topics of my life and my job after the terrorist attacks. I was shocked by this privatization of the land because of liberalism, tourism, art becoming goods for festivals with barriers and barricades, and it's quite invasive. And in Brussels now we have missions because we want to connect with the city with the street art. I'm also part of a new committee that reflects on how we can give art back to a place in order to have a shared space and not just a place where I say A, you say B, and another one says C. We don't want to have conflictual spaces. We want to create connections. Thank you. Thank you. So this experience of the reenactment in Brussels was something surprising, because when things happen there, what's really surprising, and the response of the public was very beautiful. There was occasional audience just around us. Thank you. What we are doing and what we are about to do, what we will have next week in Athens, is the same. So I ask Nadja Agryropoulou, one of the curators, together with Pauline and Costanza during these 2 years of project. I'd like to ask her to come and tell us the view for Athens and what will take place next week.
Thank you very much. I hope you're not too tired by now. I have to tell you, I am so intimidated by everything I saw yesterday, how beautiful the city and the pieces were interweaved here in Reggio Emilia reenactment. So chapeau to Costanza. And also, because I couldn't travel then to Brussels, I just realized what an amazing story with this Mary Poppins optimism, this collective joy of going through Brussels like that. It is amazing what a different kind of story this is becoming. And I have to tell you, Gigi, you are here, you should know now, I mean, Fabio knows, I was so suspicious of this project in the beginning. I said, what? An ideal city? I mean, consider the words. There's no ideal, and the cities are going to hell, as we can see. I mean, they're all becoming too smart for me. So when it all started, it became a question. How can you speak about an ideal city? It seems improbable, it seems impossible. How can you even consider dancing it? And is it possible that art can become the kind of platform that makes this possible? And in which way? So, if art can actually offer this kind of feeling of freedom and radical experimentation, I like that you chose this word so often. And if culture means transformative change, where and how is culture made known, lived, sustained? What do we really mean about it? So, Athens, as you probably know, has been one of the major sites where culture has been determined questions, the Platonic agora, the peripatetic philosophers, everyone considering a possible answer to this. So the modern city of Athens has been built around the monument par excellence, the Acropolis rock, a combination of a natural formation and an architectural, cultural accomplishment. It was actually a commission, like those pieces, right? It was commissioned, the Acropolis, as a monument. So it has totally captured the Western imagination, an inescapable emblem. According to Greek mythology, and there's a reason why I'm saying that, it was Kekrops, half man, half shepherd, snake, that founded the Acropolis. So there is something very pagan and not also human there. And it's quite interesting to remember that and when we talk about movement. So here you are, ages ago, people fantasized all kinds of things about the Acropolis. Movement was always a part of it. Maybe you already know these very famous images by Nelis, the photographer, of naked dancers on the Acropolis in the 1930s. A scandal at the times that they were made. So, later, and gradually and through the years, what you can see here, this coexistence of bodies, monument, the suggested surroundings of the city became one. This was actually the ideal city, that kind of combination. And this is the kind of narrative that was formed and is still being told about the Acropolis. So what do you see here? What we can see is a dancer destaged, moved out of the stage of the big theater and restaged, reenactment, right, in the open space of the Acropolis. But isn't this the biggest, the most famous stage in the world, the Parthenon? So each time we restage, we reenact, we replace, we retranslate, and everything we do like that, there's so many things to reconsider. And this is what we did in the first phase of the reenactment of the MicroDances in Athens. I have to tell you, it was a miracle. 21 dances, MicroDances, 3 museums, Athens, Greeks, right? It's not something that is always so well prepared, but it happens in the end. Thanks to the amazing team of our partners in the project. Fabio, chapeau to you again. So we started here. The most improbable thing of all is that we got the permission to do part of the dances in the Archaeological Museum. I heard Pauline saying, the audience, it was a bit far from the... There was no way ever the archaeologists would give permission to do something like that in the Holy of Holies, the Archaeological Museum. Founded in 2009, open for the public, huge debate about it, to house all the most important relics from the Acropolis monument. But it happened. So it's a win. It's a win on what we usually face when we do things in space. Ivana said something amazing before, and I keep this in mind, this change of the elements. How do the elements change? And how do the elements change when there are questions of ownership? Place is ownership. Public space, private space, the space of the archaeologists, the space of the cultural workers, of the art historians, of the varied publics that participate. So it happened, and it was quite an experience because we had all these bodies inert and moving bodies next to each other, and all this history and time coming on and forth. And I chose these images, close-up images, so that I can zoom out and introduce another idea about this project. It's a constant zooming in, zooming out, going close, moving further, moving in time, but also in space, but also in capabilities and bodies. So this is the epitome of dance, for me, of movement, is time, space, mattering. This is what quantum physics say now. And actually, it is also the tension between micro and macro, the bird's eye view, the frog's eye view, the dog's eye view, the different ways that we see the world from different eyes, human and animal eyes. And so, as we moved within the museum, we changed our perception of how bodies are placed in space, and we moved even from the micro to the macro with, it reminded me of this common experience that we had recently of the virus. Imagine these very, very small, the infinitesimally small viruses that can produce this kind of super macro impact that we lived with the coronavirus now. And even when we were on the top of the Contemporary Art Museum, you can see the Acropolis on the right, so the inescapable emblem was there. And then the big architecture of the Niarchos Foundation and the improbability of crossing, even though there is something to climb on in the middle of the bodies there. This is the Tedesco piece that I thought we saw an excellent performance of it here in Reggio, Emilia. It found its home here, I think, the piece. And then this was one of the pieces that is not in the reenactment, but it gave me a very good link to this other piece. It's one of my favorites. You can see the Nikolaidis Knight Rider piece where you can have this acephalic body that is leaning back, and actually the head of the body is becoming the representation of the monument. So here is a new hybrid that, depending on the way you see, may grow and arise. And here you are. Here is actually, I have to tell you the secret, the image that brought into my mind the choice of the Athens reenactments. What you see in the back is one of the most ancient plants in the universe, an acanthus, a very old fern. And actually, this is a plaster representation of a palmette, and it used to sit on corners of the Acropolis monument. Why? It represents regeneration. It's palm leaves and acanthus leaves together. And it was perfect how this was combined with the movement of Keku. This plant is, you can find it everywhere. It's wild, everywhere in Athens, but not only in Athens, everywhere in Mediterranean, in different types. You know what it says? It says a story of reenactments, a story of plants migrating from place to place, a story of Greeks being voyagers and traders and bringing with them, even by chance, you know how plants move around. So I thought that this is a good time to move to the subconscious of the city, the underbelly, the stomach, whatever one can find when the architectural element retreats. What will happen, I thought, if we take out the lot of architecture and we give space to the original architecture, the forest, the garden, the farm, wherever we come from, all of us, when we move in space. So what will happen in Athens is a scandal again, because everybody comes to see Athenian monuments. No one has a clue how difficult it is to move in this crazy city these days. So we are moving everyone to the Agricultural University of Athens. The best kept secret in the city. Huge area, 5 minutes from the center of the city, of the Omonia Square, gardens, farms, wild spaces, a 100-year-old institution where what has been planted and grown was the future of economy in Greece. Food, the means of the primal production, something that we have completely forgotten, not only in Greece, but everywhere, hence the food crisis and the energy crisis now. So, here is different spaces. I will not be revealing who is showing what where, but there are several places that we considered. This is, the place is huge. We had to make a rather moderate walk from one to the other. I want to show you something very interesting. It's probably too far, but the ornamentation in the windows is made out of wheat, the form of wheat. So here again, we have this transference from the wild, mythic acanthus to the wheat that represents human intervention. And so, the Sacred Road, the university space is from one and the other side of the Sacred Road, the road that led from Athens to Elefsis, the place of the sacred mysteries, one of the most important places of ritual in ancient Greece, still a very, very interesting place to visit. So, here are some of the views, hidden spaces in the university, a beautiful museum, agricultural museum, even relics from the Ottoman occupation, which is still an open wood for the Greeks. Farmhouses, greenhouses where we will have events reenacted, these strange relics from things that were happening in the open farms, the places where they keep the machinery, and these are images of entanglements of the plants and all of that. This is the most ancient olive tree in Greece. They say it's the olive tree that comes from Plato's Academy. So you can see, you can always get, even if it's not the Parthenon, a really sexy story about time when you are in Greece. And representations in the small museums of plants of the 19th century, of the 18th century. I love these old museums that have not been innovated. I like them. Let's keep them like that. Let's keep that part like this. The library coming from the 60s, the cow farm, the shed, the sheep. The sheep I liked. So the more than human intelligence, something that we must consider more and more now, the secret gateways to this other intelligence, the youth, the people, the student body that are moving around, like the body of workers that I saw yesterday as part of the very, very important Reggio Emilia history, a very radical history of people fighting for their working rights. So this will be the story of the reenactments in Athens. Going back to Ivana, it's a story about not changing spaces, but changing weather. What she described, this change of elements, you said elements, atmospheres, looks, how you feel, how the light is, how nothing is predictable. This is the change of weather. This is what we mean by weather. This combination of elements that have to do with so many different attributes. And I have to tell you, the Greeks have this interesting word about weather. We call it kairos. Kairos is weather, time fulfilled by human intervention. So the weather is changing means so many different things that involves human and non-human. And on a funny note, I will finish, but showing you 3-4 photographs manipulated that a friend, a photographer, Dimitris Tsoumblekas, had done back in 2004. The Athenian Olympics. Everybody came to Greece, huge narrative about the heroic future that we were going to have. A little after that came the crisis and the debt and everything that we had to pay to go through this heroic narrative. So he made these images. You don't even realize what you're seeing, but what you're seeing is the Acropolis without the polis. The polis is substituted by the forest. The wildness, what could be if there wasn't this wild progress that we are talking about. And then some more of this wildness into the city. The bodies that are moving in water in the middle of the street, or the wild goats that are roaming the cities, and possibly, why not? This is probably the ideal city.
Okay, so after Athens, and after having looked at the past and the future, we'll look at what's happening in the present here in Reggio Emilia. All right. So after these beautiful presentations made by my colleagues, there would be so many things to say about each ideas given by my colleagues and Ivana. But let's try to come back here. I think it was one of the most interesting elements of this challenge, of this intellectual and tangible challenge. It was the difference between these three cities. It's obvious. It doesn't have to be explained. But when we were talking about the first phase, that is the creation of this jump between the language of dance and a place, a venue, and exhibitory space, we talk about non-assigned places to bring art to non-dedicated spaces, to bring microdance to something that has definite connotations, to bring them to non-dedicated spaces like the institutional venues that are closed but not dedicated to dance. This is the first form of important translation, and to bring that to 3 different cities means many different debates on that. The different size scales between Athens, Brussels, and Reggio Emilia, which have been characterized by an ever-changing feature. The size scale of Reggio Emilia was the first thing we needed to think about. We can cross the entire city of Reggio Emilia, spending in the same time we need to cross the one area described by Pauline in Brussels. And this size difference is true, and because of that we need to understand how that relates to the audience and the dancers and the connection between one dance and the other. Then there's also the matter of the content of each dance and the surrounding context. In my own experience, this was the fil rouge of the entire journey. I started this experience with a lab done with the choreography, a geobiography laboratory that wanted to focus the attention of each individual the issue of space. What space do I come from? Where do I find myself? What space is represented? In which space am I dancing? This lab was very important, this workshop, because it allowed me to get in touch with some, not all, because the project led to choices. I could understand and contextualize in 2 different directions what we were doing. First of all, the idea of space that was within each choreography and understanding also the common parts and the differences, and also the type of space we found ourselves in. I don't live in Reggio Emilia. I'm not from Reggio Emilia. I'm a curator for public art projects, and I've been doing this job for 20 years. And I know that you cannot do a public art project without knowing the territory and living there. All projects I curated were defined by these centers of knowing the territory. I knew the town of Reggio Emilia, but I had never lived here. And that led to a deeper reflection. On the one side, it's a limitation, because I'm not its inhabitant, but at the same time, I find myself also in a privileged position because I can I can understand the different points of view of the inhabitants by listening to them and reading the situation even before starting to interpret everything. Let's now move on to how everything was organized. We chose together to work on the connection between the town center and the outskirts. We have heard about this outskirts, that is an important neighborhood from the Reggiane that represents the manufacturing past of the city. This is not just the outskirts, it's the pulsing heart of the city. It's a manufacturing area and it's inhabited area. At the beginning, we wanted to understand how we could involve the residential neighborhood here. This relationship between town center and outskirts, we tried to keep it through dialogue between the different venues. And we also tried to work on the features of each microdance to build this dialogue also between the content, the choices of each choreographer and the territory. I will show you a few pictures. We started from the town centre with San Prospero Theatre. We started from a venue and a performance that led to many questions. Think about the images we have seen also within the Acropolis Museum. We were facing this disparity. We had performances that in their exhibition dimension of the microdances were facing such an ancient and symbolically important space with the Greek statues. And I had to face this big issue. How can you keep that comparison? That type of language, that type of microdance that immediately relates to the Vitruvian man figure, because we see this body with axes. It also reminds you of the athlete figure. And we had just seen the exhibitory version in the Acropolis within an environment where it was compared to the Greek statues and an iconography of the body that refers to certain rules. So it was interesting to see how we reflected on it to create this kind of dialogue with an iconography we couldn't reproduce in a town like Reggio Emilia. In this case, it's a field, and we wanted to play with this dimension of the athlete, but also with this idea of jumping from one role to the other, as this is both a field and a sports field and a circus. It's a matter of discovering for the first time or rediscovering places of the town you have seen hundreds of times, but that are seen under a different light. Sometimes it's a matter of entering public or private spaces that have been experienced in a certain way or that have never been seen before. Many times yesterday people came to see, I discovered things and places of my town that I had never known before. I'd like to focus on this image because we see a clarinet player. Also these elements of the performances that have always been within the microdances in the other cities have participated to this reenactment journey and reinterpretation journey. And we try to make it as local as possible through a positive process. The musicians are musicians that comes from the music conservatory. They belong to the local community. Here we have Casotti Square. I'd like to thank Nadja for her compliments. And here we have a performance within a lived space, that is a square where you have cafes with the outdoor tables and people that are there to have dinner. We tried to make it as mimetic as possible. We tried to create a performance within a real place, to trying to respect the scenographic elements and also working by contrast. Mr. Tedesco's choreography has a deep content and meaning. It talks about pollution, the production of plastic, and the pollution that causes in our crazy ecosystem. And it's represented by this white figure. In its initial figure, it has a completely white scenography around her, representing this artificial nature of the contemporary world, characterized by the production of plastic. This scene takes place within a square where people are truly sitting and drinking. And it works by contrast. A consumer sitting there is immersed within this scene and lives both these ideas of familiarity, because the dancers represents them, and this conceptual contrast. I'm polluting too, I'm consuming too. So I recognize myself both by imitation and by contrast. I think this is the most evident contextualization element we worked on. We have seen the images of this performance of the La Toada choreographer within a space such as the Acropolis Museum. Here, an image like that directly refers to the monument and the statues. It had to be associated to the monumental representation of the body that becomes alive over a pedestal. The pedestal has always been the basis of a statue and a sculpture. It divides the work of art from the real space. In this case, the pedestal is a barrel. In this case, it's about representing and thinking about the difference between this subtle work connected to sculpture. The choreographer quotes Brancusi and his theory of the body and of the representation of the statue and the monument, but we're also talking about a body coming alive, and we see all these subtle shades of the movements, and we decided to put that within a private venue, a courtyard of a palace within Via Roma. As Fabio was saying, to think about this inclusive, participating city, the one we are building together, we decided to involve different local players as the Roma Zero Association, that allowed us, in this case, to gain access to number 22, this private courtyard with palms within, a place that is not as pompous as other Baroque courtyards, but this intimate atmosphere made us understand this was the best place to represent a dance that couldn't be monumental in a town like Reggio Emilia. This rediscovery of the private places is fundamental within urban journeys. We know that the public space is getting increasingly privatized and denied, so this dialogue between micro and macro that is related to the topic of microdances and the relationship between microdances and spaces. Here we have a connection between public and private. It is extremely important in this kind of reflection. Here we decided to use places that haven't been dedicated to dance, and we decided to go under a road bridge. We wanted people to visit this underground passage that goes below the railways. This is a daily life route that is lived quickly, either on foot or by bike. But it is also a place characterized by the presence of these murales works, street art works, writings. It's living, it's alive as a place. But I don't know how much time you spend looking at and reading these writings, but it's the most obvious evidence of the transformation of the city. The entire journey ends against a wall with the murales, and the walls are the body of the city, but also its pages. They are the expressions of the city where you put text, but that text doesn't stay there forever. That text fills the city of content. It's a page that is written and rewritten, and it's part of this living and ever-changing reality. To cross that was quite interesting, but to set one of the performances in that place was extremely valuable to us, and each one of these locations was chosen not through such an immediate process. We thought so much about the choice of this spot. This is the music under passage. A street artist decided to call it like that by writing that on the wall. The first few times I was doing this route, I've always felt strong vibrations, strong vibes in this place, because someone decided to set something on that wall. Someone decided to give a definition to that place with a specific connotations related to music. This passage where you find so many drawings representing musicians, musical notes, musical instruments, all elements relating to music. Where does it take to? After leaving that passage, you reach an historical place of the city, ex-mafia, one of the most important discos for the 1980s and 1990s in Italy. It's very important for the underground electronic music in Italy. And this route physically makes you cross from a humanistic city we know with a certain history to a city of the present. Reggio Emilia is not like other cities where you have this contamination between contemporary writing, street art, the free expression. No, Reggio Emilia has a preserved, protected historic centre. The free expressions you find in Rome, for example, in Santa Maria in Trastevere Square, you do not find that in Reggio Emilia. You find that only as soon as the town centre ends. This performance sees a lyrical singer, an opera singer, meeting us. She starts singing, she meets us, she looks at us, and she accompanies the dance. You can see that in this picture. And the dance takes place in a residual space, which, however, represents the elements that initially represented the microdance. You have a bar that was part of the handrail of the passage. This is part of one of the exercises we did at the beginning when we created the choreographies during the workshop. At the end of the workshop, I asked them, now, don't think about the fact that this dance will be put into a different space or need to be reset according to aesthetics principle. Please reassess it, reprocess it, walk through your city, look for all those elements that satisfy the elements of your performance, not only at a physical level, but at a conceptual, semantical level. So you walk through this passage, you reach the historic headquarters of City Mafia. Now it's the headquarters for CTO, for activities with disabled children and adolescents. This time we decided to do both things. This place as a place that represents part of the history of the city, something that doesn't exist anymore, in order to rediscover the memory of that place, but we also wanted to emphasize what it has now become. It has become something important, something inclusive, as Annalisa Rabitti was saying earlier. Inclusion is a new way of building the city of the future. It's not just the city of the 80s with electronic music, but it's a city where everyone participates. Within this dance, instead of a musical text, we listen to a text with words done through the recording of words and thoughts. The dancer dances her own thoughts, which are quite confused, overlapping, a bit like teenagers, young teenagers in their rooms, dancing their own thoughts as a way to evade from this constricting living space. Within this place, this was perfect to satisfy this idea, because here you work on words, on expressing yourself. Every day you listen to people. So that's why it was interesting to us. Always focusing on participation and being part of a broad network of active individuals within the city. In this case as well, there was an active participation. The carpet, where you see many written words representing the text danced by the dancer, was made by the CTO and their teenagers. I look there because we have Barbara Chierici. She will tell us about this process later on.
So, as Nadja said before, the location for this piece is absolutely unusual considering the formal features. This is a private space. It's a garage, actually. So, of course, no one would visit, this place. Well, we can do it now thanks to the project. And once again, this is, one of the key topics I mentioned yesterday. This place is activated by dancers and by our presence. Those places are once again enacted, reenacted, or reactivated thanks to us. So thanks to the presence of our dancers. So this Technopole space has been chosen, to locate the only dance produced on a site-specific basis. So, the only piece that hasn't been created through a reenactment, but it has been imagined exactly for this space, this location, together with the choreographer. We've been there. We have observed, the key features of this space that has been chosen for a fundamental issue, which is, based on the contents of this dance. This is a window on urban transformation. So this is a window within the so-called technopole. It represents, the steps going into the future. So representing the city of innovation, Luca has mentioned before. So once again, this is the vision that you can take advantage of. So this tells about the transition and then the contemporary moments or levels of the transformation. It's a building site, okay? So thanks or even through this window, you can see the evolution, the change, the new buildings. This dance was based. So this dance was, based on these elements, so much so that the choreographer decided, to put together, many different styles, many different, dances from different age brackets or epochs, because he wanted to mix epochs, styles, and historical moments, which is what you can see in the window. So the change of the city and its stories, so the overlapping of the historical moments and styles, which is exactly what happens in the Giovanni Zau dance. Now, this is the pathway of the MicroDancer, the MicroDances in Reggio Emilia. It ends in this beautiful area, green area, very close to the Loris Malaguzzi International Center, facing this wall, which is the wall you can see here. And, the wall represents, if you will, the very last wall of the city before reaching the residential neighborhood that we mentioned before. It's a sort of a threshold that sort of a watershed that divides city spaces, also representing a sort of a blank, a sheet of paper. So this is why we decided to choose this place. The choreographer, and in this case we have a dancer, so we don't have, the girl, the dancer we saw before, once again, because, these dances, have been passed on to a second generation of dancers. And again, look at the gesture that you can see. This is sort of writing that you can see here, I guess, on the body. Okay, a writing on the body. So this is the gesture that the dancer makes, writing on his body with a piece of chalk. So once again, this writing resonates with this beautiful element, the wall as the body of the city. So the dancer, be him or her, they write on their body, and this wall is the body of the city. While in the Acropolis Museum, we saw exactly the same dance, but it resonated with this beautiful dimension. The sign on the body, which represents the Greek statues. A body, system, and a sign concerning measures, so something monumental. Now, in Reggio, of course, we don't have the possibility to do this. So what do we have to resonate with? And in my opinion, we can resonate with the body of the city. So once again, the body is sort of reenacted, rewritten, and even the semantics of the wall change. And they also are reenacted, especially considering the place where we are. Once again, we also wanted to involve, the local organizations, so Reggio children, and usually they work in ateliers, so sort of workshops. This is included into their educational, offer. And of course, we decided to work on this, writing, or let's say, letting your body take part in the social collective life. Okay, then, this is it. And the floor goes now to Fabio. I'm sure he will draw the right conclusions. Okay, so for the city of Reggio Emilia, we asked the choreographer Francesca Latuada. She already has created a sort of a solo that you've seen before. So Francesca basically reworked an idea from Brussels because, we couldn't do this in Brussels. I mean, in the Léal du Scherbeck. And in this case, we wanted to strengthen and deepen the partnerships we had already created. We have invited 40 boys and girls, very young people coming from Agora, plus 6 Excel students. This is a workshop with Francesca Latuada to make an extended version of the Eppur si muove original pièce. And this is very close to the so-called hall or building number 18 in the STU Reggiane. You have time to enjoy this show tomorrow. Okay, well, it's sold out, but in a way, we will try and, let you enjoy the show. Okay, then. So, without further ado, let me, leap forward once again. And in this case, we have a so-called external third-party perspective on our projects. So, once again, we want to talk about culture, art, and the regeneration. We now have architect Salmoni. Now, Mr. Salmoni is the national coordinator of the Creative Cities networks belonging to UNESCO. So, we told you what we have done, so now it's up to you to have an extended view and a deeper perspective on what is happening right now around us. Thank you. Thank you. Grazie. Thank you, Fabio. And I also would like to thank Gigi with this unique opportunity this morning. Now, I'm here today as an observer, basically. The experience that Aterballetto is talking about this morning. Well, first of all, we have a first meeting with Mr. Cristoforetti, and that sort of happened, by chance. It was a sort of random. And I've been working with them in the Creative Cities network, once again belonging to UNESCO. So that meeting, the very first, let's say, encounter with this new situation was based on curiosity. But then it turned into a very important, a major encounter, in my opinion, because it has been complemented to our perspective. I will be talking about this point of view in a second. So we have a specific vision and the way to interpret, to come through the city in a unique way and in a very new, different way. So I decided to partake in the initiative, launched by Gigi Cristoforetti. Once again, we met in another, Zoom-based workshop some months ago. And now we have this meeting this morning here in Reggio Emilia because, I want to be here in the city and I want to see what we are doing here with my own eyes, okay, just to better understand the cultural offering. So let me tell you right away that I have, many different functions. For example, I am the national coordinator of the UNESCO Creative Cities networks. We have 13 such cities. They all belong to the Creative Cities Network, CCN, that was created back in 2004. And I have to say that now in the network we have around 300 cities from all over the world. So I'm not talking about the European Union, I'm really talking about the entire planet. So we have some, megalopolis, Beijing, for example, Cairo, Mexico City, Istanbul, and, huge metropolitan areas, all the way down to very small cities of something like 20,000 inhabitants only. For example, I represent the city of Fabriano. This is a small town, a very industrial town. Italians know it very well, with only 30,000 inhabitants. And we have every single urban scale, inside UNESCO. But, the beating heart of this network is represented by, mid-sized cities like Reggio, Emilia, Modena, or neighboring Bologna. These cities are a sort of a bridge or a link between, a megalopolis on the one side and a small village on the other. So they're really, really able to, to pass on the incredible energies of huge metropolitan areas, including their crises and their contradictions, again, on the one side, to the small dimension, the small-sized cities. They can take advantage of the energy from the small villages or the small towns where everything is easier in a small place in terms of, understanding resources, collecting talents, finding talents, and then all of this can be, passed on to the large metropolitan built-up areas. We have 13 such UNESCO cities in Italy. We have the three most important cities, Rome, Milan, Turin, and then we have Fabriano, as I said before, Modena, Bologna, Bergamo. So this is what I represent, 13 Italian towns, including the National Institute for Urban Planning, if you will. So this is a national institution created by Adriano Olivetti. Now, that was soon after the end of the Second World War. And, this organization was based on two main pillars. Pillar number one is a sort of, let's say, renovation or reconversion of Italian cities after the, very bad experience represented by World War II. And the second pillar is to have an interdisciplinary process. I mean, we want to, overlap knowledge bases and having a positive cross-contamination, which is what Adriano Olivetti thought back in the 1950s, and then for more than 10 years because he passed away in the 1960s. So his company, Olivetti, and all of his business, has been, if you will, populated by, engineers and the computers, the processors. So from Mario Chu, top engineer, he died in a car accident, and then his death almost coincided with, if you will, the death of the company, together with Ezio Mari, Ettore Sossas, Ludovico Guaroni, Eduardo De Filippo, Eugenio Montale, so poets, architects, and designs. Personalities of the Italian literature and Italian culture. So this is the basis, if you will, of our National Institute for Urban Planning. So throughout the years, we have developed and evolved our stream of thoughts until reaching today's epoch. So we started working on the planning of the city, urban planning, that became more and more sophisticated, the so-called interdisciplinary approach. What didn't change was the need to plan the city. I'm not really talking about objective, very accurate, objectives or based on figures or numbers. Now, the basis for them was knowledge, passing on knowledge, disseminating knowledge. So this is the generation I belong to. So the scientists and even the scholars that I have met. So I think that the key frontier today is the urban regeneration. So why are we talking about urban regeneration today? Well, because I think that, we know something absolutely mission critical. So cities are not spreading. So the use of, soil is over, or it should be over. But, in evolved, situations, once again, the cities are not becoming bigger and bigger, so we're now working on the already existing, built-up areas. So we can do this with, thanks to urban regeneration. So we're not talking about expansion plan, but we're talking about reconversion, regeneration plans today. So as Costanza said before, this is no longer a transformation, so we are not just re-qualifying cities, we are regenerating them. It's a complex definition, if you will. And by the way, I do have a small file. I can, show it to you with a complex definition. So, on the same level, and at the same time, we have plenty of drivers, intertwining. We have culture, we have the environment, we have the social issues, we have economy, sustainability of local administrations, and many other ingredients or drivers. Now, these drivers may become more or less important depending on the context in which they are. Once again, as Costanza said before, reading, interpreting places is fundamental to really understand what the context is or what the main pillars are. So urban regeneration is also represented by many other elements. For example, is this place attractive enough? So, for example, a project is more attractive, so it draws the attention of people. And it's just like a physical objective element, and it comes from a bottom-up process. Of course, this is not a process based on authority or power. Just like in the 1970s, local administrators decided everything, saying, okay, we will do A, B, C, etc. So they have generated projects or plans themselves. They did it in a great way, just in this region. In many other regions, well, that was not virtuous. In many cases, politics were, if you will, based on private interests or other types of interests. So once again, it's a bottom-up approach, as I said before, and it is based on different drivers. Well, especially in the last 15 years, people have understood eventually that the cultural driver is the most powerful one. It is really able to put everything together. It is also able to summarize and represent all the elements and features also belonging to other areas. So all of them can be put together. So all of this has become an integrated and shared resource. So people have understood this. So, the Italian Ministry for Culture, but also another ministry, so the Ministry for Infrastructure, the Ministry for Economy. So it is not a chance that within the so-called PNRR, they have developed the cultural driver as the top best expression. Of course, I'm talking about the different, possibilities to get grants from the central government. Different measures have been approved that they've been so successful. I'm really talking about thousands and thousands of projects that local administrators have shared with people. And I have to say that, there's a fil rouge. I mean, we know that culture is a driver. And many other elements or consequences are representing a sort of a constellation all around, the key driver. There's no cultural evolution if there's no improvements of the environmental culture. So what we need is nature-based solutions. Once again, nature-based solutions. I saw some of them, and I can see some such solutions in some locations at MicroDances in different cities. There's a very strong relationship with nature. There's a sort of a connection with local places. There's a beautiful relationship with water, and then botany or green areas. I guess also the social element is another part, if you will, of this complex constellation, and in some cases, it's one of the main pillars of this, group of situations. Individuals or subjects. So people are right at the center of our, attention. So they are, the key focus of regeneration projects. In my opinion, all of the tenders, so all of the grants that can be, used, especially by local administrators. And now this comes from the 4 ministries that I have mentioned before. So one of the, again, key drivers was the creation of new cultural institutions and new cultural places. So once again, there have been other grants and even other tenders, so to say, and the key driver there was to enhance the value of some local elements, social issues, if you will, and, helping communities grow. As I said before, we need to increase attractiveness and also increase the level of attention. This means having very strong, sturdy communication processes. Now, all of these projects have to be based on an effective, rational communication flow, so as to expand the reputational capital, but also the relational capital of those places that you can find into the regeneration project list. Again, these are the key principles we are, complying with. So we are working with this with the Venice Biennale and then the Urban Planning Center I have mentioned before. So in general, all the partners who right now are working in order to have, the same target. In some cases they intertwine, they overlap, they interact, and also exchange, their policies. I have to say that, this, universe, if you will, has to grow the attractiveness, but also the communication level. So we have to focus our attention, and once again, the spotlight has to be exactly on some, again, mission-critical elements. We have to do this in order to seize opportunities to get funds and grants. Now, this morning I'm here because we have had, the same experience, and once again, I was talking about the, let's say, interdisciplinarity. The fact that UNESCO is working on many different types of towns and many different sizes, if you will. And once again, this is represented by your own project. So again, I'm here this morning because I think that, the spotlight I have just mentioned. So the fact of, casting light on a very specific, place. Well, I think that this is what MicroDances do in urban centers. And this was based exactly on the contents of the three previous speeches. Places, locations are not just chosen by chance. You have read and understood, the context, the so-called preliminary context framework. Now, once again, this comes before every single project. There's a long critical analysis process before approving projects. So the answer we give includes many different elements. What we want to understand is the relationship that exists between, the emerging elements to be regenerated, and then the way we can regenerate that element. Once again, we want to be effective. We don't want to disrupt everything, okay? I don't have to create a different project. I don't have to change everything. And as Gigi said in the conference yesterday, now this is a project having to do, with the Maxi Museum in Rome, which is a beautiful place. It will be replaced by a residential neighborhood with, 4-story buildings with, roads and streets and parking lots. So we don't have to just, turn in those places into urban places. You have to leave, the identity of that place unchanged. Maybe you can, if you will, standardize it, making it a little bit more contemporary, just like this place. But at the same time, you have to keep, the characters, the morphology, and the story unchanged. So once again, this is interesting for us, the physical or tangible change. But then in terms of regeneration, we have many other things to do. For example, who are the beneficiaries? How much money do we need? What about the impact on the local community? What about the advantages for the city? And are we able to improve the quality of life thanks to these projects? So once again, back to what UNESCO does. This is an epoch-making, if you will, journey in terms of the Agenda 2030 priorities. Well, there's been a big leap forward. The city of Fabriano, together with Bologna, managed, to get into the UNESCO Cities Network back in 2013. There were only two priorities from the Agenda 2030, goal number 8 and goal number 11. 8 is basically the expansion or the development of the business in general, in particular, manufacturing industry. And goal number 11 is the settlements, the physical transformation of places, okay? So this is what we represented. Now, afterwards, starting from 2018, so with Mrs. Azoulay, so the new director, goals have changed. So for many years, until the beginning of this year, the key goals were the very first goals, gender equality, social inclusion, and of course, combating discrimination. So the I think it's the very first 5 of 6 goals in the once again, education, training, and then access to education. So these were the priority goals. But now the attention shifted, if you will, from the manufacturing part or the physical part to, the human-centric sustainable development. Now, the UNESCO the General Meeting declarations are focused on AI, open source, so open source-based science, artificial intelligence, and climate change. So again, the focus shifts towards digital culture and new horizons, which are now allowed thanks to digital tools. So the evolution of urban regeneration, I mean, since it was first conceived, that was around 15 years ago within the so-called consolidated city, it went through many different steps. Of course, I'm not denying what we did in the past, okay? So we haven't forgotten what we still have to do in terms of physical changes of the city. Rather, we have added, quality of life of human beings. And now we are also adding the digital culture context. Now, these three elements, in my opinion, now travel together. And I think they are also able to even better, structure regeneration projects. So once again, I'm here in Reggio with you today to observe and to capitalize on what has been done. So all what I said or what you have done won't be forgotten. It is not the case here in Aterballetto, because here you have plenty of knowledge that you've been consolidating in the past years. So instead of capitalizing, we have to, disseminate, to spread, we have to involve people, and why not? We also have to, increase the audience. People showing interest and then injecting, if you will, more and more, contamination and exchanges and even sharing actions. So what is useful, in my opinion, is, again, networks. So we have the Creative Cities Network. UNESCO is now offering us many things. And secondly, we also have the National Institute of Urban Planning, or the Biennale in Venice. Now, I don't want to dwell on all of the foundations. I mean, the network that we've been, putting together, and we are strengthening it, this network day in, day out. So there are many, if you will, elements or factors that can be shared. This is the proposal I may put forward this morning. Well, I'd like to communicate better, so I can create a communication campaign to summarize all what you have done, so that people know what you are doing, so we may have an impact on those, granting funds, giving money, which places to involve, so governments, local agencies, and here in Italy, CDP. At the same time, we may participate in the Urban Promo event in Turin this year. So once again, there will be a communication campaign exactly focusing on what you have done here. And all of this may be, let's say, adjusted or adapted in other places. The second thing to do is we need to write. So we need to publish texts that can be, again, spread out, disseminated, or shown, for example, on magazines, journals, or the documents we make in both networks. These proposals may be implemented right away, and I'm here to share this with you. Well, actually, I'm here to share this proposal. Okay, let me wrap up with a final point. We may, represent you and your projects. So it's a research-centered approach. I cannot say scientific. Let's say we have a specific discipline or a specific, subject that can really help you improve, enhance, and redirect the project in case of doubts or in case of issues. We usually talk to public, local administrators or, a government, because, the creative city is basically an idea from the mayor, so it belongs to the city. And, this agreement produces urban policies. This means that all of this has to do directly with the local public administration, the local governments, and, that complex universe that you interact with. Maybe you just know, some sectors or some departments of this complex system. Now, the same happens in terms of planning. Now, planning as a subject has to do with, financial managers or those, offering grants and, money. And once again, you have to be able to talk to artists, but also to these people, because in some cases, some ordinary, usual approaches may not be strong enough to hit our targets. Thank you.
One of the questions we ask ourselves is this concept of the ephemeral. This idea we can have is that surely projects like these work on the image of a place and put over it also the images we leave behind. I think I will never forget some images from the Acropolis of Athens. They belong to us, those images. And also this fight against the ephemeral is part of our directions with specific elements, with the creation of performances to be viewed with the oculi, the relationship with photography. Yesterday, you told me something very interesting about this topic, about how urban regenerations sees performing arts as something different. Costanza said it before, the non-lasting. I have a definition here in my pocket, and I'd like to remind you to the definition for urban regeneration that will appear on the Treccani encyclopedia. We based ourselves on a definition made by the University of Calgary and taken by the National Institute for Urban Planning for 10 years. I tried to summarize it, but at the end of that, there is a sentence saying that events are an integral part of urban regeneration and can be its drivers. So it's something ephemeral, something that happens and then ends, and it often doesn't leave traces behind. In these last 10 years, we have understood that events, I'd like to quote the research made by Oliviero Ponte di Pino on festivals. We now have more than 1,000 festivals all over Italy. They have been the driving force for the reputation, knowledge, and activities of cities. Festivals have been the elements that allowed the cities to put order into their own programming and to communicate that to the public. So these events weren't so ephemeral as we thought. The debate made by Renato Nicolini in the past, when he said that the ephemeral is the central part, and it was against those that saw the current the operational administrative expenditure. Culture wasn't seen as an investment, it was seen as an operating expense. It was something that a city could or could not afford according to its size, its prestige, and so on. Smaller cities, provincial cities, often couldn't afford that. There wasn't enough money for these ephemeral activities. Now events have become something structural. So what was once called ephemeral has now become an integral and structural part for the growth and development of a cultural city. So this process for events allows individuals like you and actors, players like you and artists to become the main characters, protagonists of urban regeneration. There is a law that has been consistently ignored in this country. It's the 2% law, that it should be an obligation, but it gives the opportunity to invest 2% of the cost of public works funded by public finances for contemporary art works. If I build a school, if I build a justice building, if I create buildings for culture, I can use 2% of the investment, for example, 200,000 euro for 1 million. Sorry, 20,000 euro. Yes, I got it right. 20,000 euro for artworks. And I can regulate this investment according to the size I can afford through these investments. Think about the investments made by the recovery plan, the tenders for the associations of municipalities. There are 5 million for municipalities under 5,000 inhabitants, 2 million for private gardens and parks. 2% of all of that could be dedicated to public art. So public art within public spaces, public spaces are the new horizon where you can organize events because they are an integral part of urban regeneration, and we cannot forget that. Open public spaces are our new frontier for experimenting. A city like Prato created the new architecture and urban planning plan, changing the urban planning law from 1942 to plan the public plan and then the built environment, to put laws for the soil and then for the built environment. And by changing this priority, Prato added innovation to our culture, and I hope this will also be true for other cities. Thank you very much, truly. Obviously, also for the invitation to tell us things, all right? So let's now move on to the second closing part. Yes, there's a bee flying around. We have decided to dedicate this moment to the stories of all the players that have helped us create the reenactment in Reggio Emilia. We had invited some of these people. We have already heard from Locatori, and to each of them we asked one question. The question was the same we asked Luca, so I'd like to ask Christian Fabio, President of Reggio Children, to come here and tell us his answer to that question. The question, as we said, is about the future. We said that this definition of ideal city is almost non-understandable, because the city is... We are trying to build possible visions about us and the new generations. So we tried to convey a model based on innovation, the creation of networks, the horizontal engagement in this dialogue with culture. We believe that when it comes to art, that can become a driver for regeneration. And what is this city of the future that Reggio Children is building? I'd like to talk once again about the reenactment, to understand if it's something that can be applied also to social bodies. I worked in UNESCO till a few months ago in the Sahel area, and in that period, the idea of the west of France occupying and waging war against the jihad, and successfully. In the last year, France and all other Western countries have started leaving the battlefield, and forms of communications between the so-called tribe heads and the jihad heads have spontaneously started, and this is creating defection among the jihadists. So a drop in the occupation force, and this was a mode used before the Western colonization. The tribes would use these ways. They had rituals. They would send a mediator that would go there, come back. There were meetings and exchange of objects that would lead to mediation, to physical mediation, to obtain peace or a reasonable ability to live together between different tribes. And think about reenactment. This came to mind, this idea of this social body that finds different ways of building peace compared to what the Western world did. And also with my colleagues, Lorella, Marilena, this is the same when it comes to the idea of atelier and the ideal city. This idea of understanding if our city knows its own forms of expression. We always ask ourselves in schools for children how Reggio Children is known, if it is known, and how can it be a resource. Let's start from a provocation, not what the city can do for the children, but what the children themselves can do for the city. It's an overhauled paradigm. Reggio Emilia built its identity on the battles made by women during the Second World War, not only to have high quality schools for young children, places they could trust, places where their children could follow an educational process of awareness. And within this process, the idea of the atelier was and still is the focus. The idea of these hundreds of languages is a defining trait of our experience. Within this idea of an atelier, we often try to focus on the process. Let's not focus on the product, but on the process. I think we have talked many times this morning about process, and this point needs to be highlighted. The future of the city, or the ideal city. Today we often talk about child-friendly cities. The UNESCO and the UNICEF talks about it, the idea of a city that becomes a place that can be lived with awareness and with pleasure by children, because if children can do that, everyone can live that way. It's a way of, maybe it's oversimplifying, but it's interesting. If a city becomes a place where children can serenely live, expressing their own talents, their own potential, seeing their rights recognized, then all other categories that have more ability for social pressure than children, because they vote, because they consume, because they are part of trade unions and organizations. If children have these rights recognized within cities, then all other categories will probably see the same. How can we do that? Assuming that this is true, and it needs to be proved, but there are many cities that are reasoning on this. There is a city in Albania that is doing this same thing with a social fervor. So if we assume that this is true, how can we do that? And we go back to the idea of an atelier. It's not a place, it's not a process. It is something that generates meaning for humankind. Atelier as what is done by the International Center, ateliers like those that are done in schools. But for me, an atelier is also an evening with local food, the Ramadan celebration by the Islam Association. These are all ateliers, and we like to think about the ideal city as a city that is a system made up of different ateliers. We like this idea as Reggio children, and we hope to find other people that find this idea intriguing. Thank you. Thank you very much. I now call Maria Teresa Grillo here as a representative for the Via Roma Zero Association. She helped us open doors, especially that door, and she also accompanied us in other ways. Yes? Thank you, most of all. It was a very interesting morning. I was able to listen to many ideas that are similar to what the Via Roma Zero Association does. I will present it quite briefly. It's an association that was created after a few years of grassroots activities. It's not the neighborhood committee, even though it is sometimes confused with it. The neighborhood committee deals with issues that can come up in different neighborhoods all over the world. It's a multi-ethnic neighborhood. It's a neighborhood that started as a neighborhood connecting the northern area of the city with the mechanical plants to the city center. And since the beginning, this neighborhood has always had a mixed vocation. It was made up of many different realities. The association doesn't directly deal with the issues of the neighborhood, but it organizes cultural and artistic events because we like to do it that took place over the years, and it made people like me joining, even though I don't live in that specific neighborhood. Among what was said today, was thinking about the difference between public space and private space. It's a duality that characterizes what the association does. Doors were open because it's something that often happens in Via Roma. Among the activities we did over the years, we have the off-circuit for Fotografia Europea, we have a theatrical performance, Memory of the Soil, that will probably be redone tomorrow, if I remember correctly. These are all activities that want to connect the lives of the inhabitants of the neighborhood, of those that live the neighborhood, with artistic events where the process is much more important than the result itself. When an artist comes to Via Roma, it means living within the houses of the neighborhood, spending time there, moving from one house to the other, and the maybe sometimes invasive request is to be able to participate to the artistic process with the belief that the exchange is enriching and comes from that, from the ability to have a discussion with an artist. Maybe the city, the ideal city, isn't necessarily an idyllic city. Via Roma is not an idyllic neighborhood, but I believe it is very beautiful that there are people, citizens, that sometimes after strong debates try to put into practice an ideal city that it is all about a wish for enrichment, for opening yourself to others. If I think about the ideal city of the future, at least my personal view, it's a city that leaves its own identity to the side for similarity. This is what our association does, and it's a concept that is extremely fertile. While identity is something that leads to some closure, similarity is something that allows us, the association, and it also allows the city itself to get closer to this ideal reality. Thank you very much.
Okay, then just one quick word on what you have just said, and on the speech we have just shared. Now, we have never named, all of our assets. I mean, we're talking about tangible, intangible assets. We're also talking about the environmental assets and even heritage that we have in the city. And we also mentioned the word the UNESCO. And now, when talking about UNESCO, so I'd like to talk about the UNESCO Convention, but there's another convention, the Faro Convention. And now the Faro Convention, raises plenty of issues. I mean, those issues we have mentioned today. Heritage is no longer static. It doesn't only have to do with our own identity, but this is rather intercultural, dynamic, and negotiable. I mean, people now talk about the negotiable heritage, which is what UNESCO is doing. Something that can be shared, between different cultures and among different identities. So this is representing something that changes. Now, the Faro Convention gives the power back to citizens. So not just in terms of vital spaces, but also the conservation of spaces or heritage. Once again, the collective heritage is, under the control of citizens. So we may want to create ateliers, which are spaces where we live together, where we coexist, we live and work together. So once again, all of this can be done by citizens. I mean, people living in the neighborhoods. They can protect, they can preserve, they can also define their own spaces in terms of the heritage, For example, the Ideal City as a project concerns many topics having to do with contemporary, urbanism that we mentioned today. But we also have a key challenge to take up in terms of artistic languages, or, for example, another issue is the participation, so taking part in these microdances on various levels. In the very first text of the microdances, we said that dance is a form of dwelling, so living. Is it temporary? Is it transient? Does it inhabit a space or not? Anyway, this also requires our own, reflection on dwelling, living with whom. So this is why I'd like to go back to the Faro Convention, because once again, empowerment is given back to citizens. So whom do we live with? You have described Via Roma. Now, this is a very intercultural place. The definition of that space is done together, and it is negotiated on a daily basis. I think it's very important issue we need to talk about, especially when talking about town planning and the urbanization of our cities, together with the so-called 2% law, as we say in Italy now. This law is sort of ancient. It's been sort of revised, and people want to change it again. Anyway, there's one fundamental point. I have just taken part in a national congress organized by the Italian Ministry of Culture, talking about cultural spaces. Artists in Italy always come late. I mean, they add something to living spaces, planning. This is the so-called 2% law. For example, we make a building. If we have some money left, okay, so let's add something. Okay, so it's difficult to plan. So what we are doing right now with this type of projects is different. I mean, it's a different idea when it comes to participation. So what I hope, of course, I'm an art historian, so my point of view is quite, if you will, specific, but I'd like artists to take part from the very beginning. We need to create an interdisciplinary, intercultural, horizontal project where the living space is always designed or planned together. This is what I mean by living together or designing or even co-planning. So artists have to be there from the very beginning, from step number one. In the very at the very beginning of the idea, we already need artists. Okay, so they don't have to come second, they have to come first, so they have to be there. Microdances are not a decoration of places. Street art is not an ornament, okay? It's not, let's say, a decoration. It is a free form of expression. Now, because we don't want to decorate the city, but because we want to inhabit spaces together, because together we want to understand what this means, to come up with a new idea of assets and create a new collective asset. This is my own interpretation. Okay, thank you. Okay, let me draw the real, very final conclusion. So Corrado Sevardi from the Peri Music School, he had to go for a family issue, so he has just left, asking me to, to say thank you to Mr. Fiorini. Now, we have a strong partnership with the Istituto Peri, together with the Fondazione Nazionale della Danza, FND, our host today. So we do plenty of things together. Once again, we merge, education. We work with teachers, students, and the language of dance. Okay, if you don't mind and if you agree, we can draw some conclusion. Where's Gigi? No. Okay, so Gigi's here, but he prefers to stay behind the scenes. Okay, I'd like to give the floor back to you. Oh no, this was your conclusion. Okay, so it's up to me to really draw the conclusions. Okay, once again, really to go through the thank you list. I'd like to thank our two international partners, Léa de Scherbeck. Pauline, congratulations. Christophe Canon, the director. Christophe is not here. Nadja Agryropoulou Constantinos, the director of the Ballet of the Opera. So once again, we spent plenty of time together. Thank you for being here today, together with all those who are, partners with us with this beautiful experience in Reggio. So Reggio Children Istituto Peri, Laura Matano, Studio Excel, Michele Merola, Agora Company, Co-Res, Beniamino Ferroni should have been here. And then the Associazione Teatro San Prospero, the city of Reggio Emilia, the city without barriers. Thank you so much for helping us, together with the Palazzo Magnani Foundation, one of the co-producers of the MicroDance project, even before the Ideal City project. Once again, Associazione Via Roma Zero, thank you so much. Luca Torri, STU Reggiane. And, okay, this is the complete list. Okay, I'm just inviting you to enjoy the show tomorrow. We have 3 time slots, 4:30, 5:30, and 6:30 p.m. tomorrow. Okay, thank you so much. Arrivederci.